Instagram Live, Erotic Storytelling, where I'll be joined by Seema Anand, who is a phenomenal storyteller, author, expert on erotic Indian literature, as well as mythologist. She's the author of this book, The Arts of Seduction, which is available on Amazon. So Seema is based in the UK. Like I said, she is a phenomenal storyteller, an expert on the Kama Sutra. Let me see if I can add her. Amongst other things, I'm really looking forward to speaking to and her career as a storyteller. I've got some of your questions that hopefully I'll be asking Seema.
Oh, okay. Hold on, hold on. Okay,
No worries.
I'm doing something wrong. Oh my God, what
It,
happened?
I think great. I think we're the right way around. Good evening.
Okay,
How are you, Seema? Lovely to
I'm
see you
good.
again.
How are you?
I'm amazing. I'm good to see you.
It's great. I'm sorry, I've got problems with my iPad suddenly. Everything was, you know how everything goes really well and then it just kind of, yeah, it just decides that it's not going to go so well after all. Okay, I think if I hold tight,
Lovely.
this will be fine.
How are you? How's the
Obviously,
family?
yes, all good. Thank you. All good. All a pain in the neck still. So I guess that's good.
Good. I can see you've been very busy the last couple of months. You're everywhere, which is great to see. I'm glad to see so many people are speaking about your great work.
It's all good, touch wood. And yeah, so long as it's actually helping and making a difference, I think that's the really important thing.
No, you're definitely making a difference. And even with this live, when I advertised it and when you shared it, I've got so many questions. I think especially from people who follow you. I was like, oh wow, this must be the Seema effect. I don't think just apology for anyone listening. I won't be able to answer, I won't be able to ask all of the questions because it's a lot. And I think we've probably got an hour and a half, but I do appreciate everyone for sending me, their questions. But before we get into the conversation at hand, and to hear more about your great career, do you mind giving a very high level pitch introduction in terms of who you are and the work that you do?
Oh God, I have to do that pitch. Okay. Yeah, my name is Seema Anand. I work with the erotic literatures of ancient India, and I'm a mythologist, I'm a storyteller, and my work is really to get people to um, get a better understanding of the idea of pleasure as opposed to sex. And so, yes, I work with the idea of pleasure, and that pleasure is not a bad thing, it's a good thing, and that it's actually good for us as well.
And the author of this fabulous book you forgot to mention as well.
No, you did that already. So,
Yeah, I have to keep plugging it. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Again, like just for the benefit of people joining, I think we first met in 2019. I attended one of your storytelling. I think it was a book launch actually. I think it was a book launch. But also, you gave a presentation in London, in central London, and I was blown away. I loved your presentation style and the way you spoke about not only about the history of erotic literature in the Kama Sutra, but you made it very easy and accessible for both men and women to like. And I went again. I think you had another one a couple of weeks later, and yeah, been a big fan and support of your work ever since. And obviously, we've collaborated on different things, but yeah, I do recommend this book as well to a lot of men as well, obviously as well as women, because I just think it's very easy to read, and especially for people, because there's so many people are fascinated by the Kama Sutra, but many people are not really aware of what it's about. And I think you've done an excellent job in bringing the book to life for modern day readers and speaking about the gems and not just like what everyone thinks about the Kama Sutra, which is like the love making,
positions.
which
And
is
then
not
it's
really
about
what the book.
positions. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not what the
So
book is about.
yes. So, but you mentioned it about explaining the difference between sex and pleasure. What do you mean by that?
So I think what's happened is that we have started to define sex. You know how words come to have a certain meaning, and sex has come to be defined as the act of penetration. So one body part into another body part, and that is sex. So even actually oral sex, people, when they have oral sex, I've heard people say, well, actually, we didn't really have sex, we just had oral sex, and as if that's different. So I just think that If I was to say, okay, redefine the word sex, it actually includes the foreplay, it includes the pleasure, it includes the conversation, it includes the emotions that you feel. People don't actually get it. So I think it's just easier to explain it in two different words and say, okay, sex is that physical act. Let's now talk about the emotional side of things. Because I think, Habib, the biggest problem is that even when we teach sex education, even when you have that, you never ever teach people about the emotions that they're going to feel. The first time that somebody goes to have sex, you equip them with lube. If they've had really good advice beforehand, you'll give them condoms, you'll give them lube, you'll say, okay, try it in this position so that you're comfortable, breathe deeply, you might bleed. You'll give them all of the explanations. Does anybody ever say what kind of emotions you're going to feel? That you're going to be this mass of excitement and nervousness, and you want to jump into your lover's arms and you want to run away all at the same time. And it's so illogical. And because we're not taught that that's normal, we hide it, and then we feel worse about ourselves. And I just think that, why don't we tell people that sex is an emotional thing? That's suddenly considered to be like a different category of things altogether. Sex is very, very emotional. And so hence I kind of divide it up and we talk about pleasure, because I think it's easier for people to understand what I'm saying if we use a different word.
Uh, yeah, I love that. I love that. And how did you get into storytelling?
I've always been a storyteller, I think, somewhere along the way. Habib, I have a real belief in the fact that the stories are the most powerful tool of influence in the universe. If you think about it, every effective leader through history has used stories to communicate their message. Stories are really important. And they're not just great for people who are trying to communicate the message. Stories are what people use to control us. They use it to communicate with us. We are identified by our stories, the stories that we tell, and equally the stories that we choose to silence. And I just feel that we tell so many stories of a woman's place in society. We tell stories of how a good woman is the kind who doesn't go out and make a noise about her husband. Even when things go wrong, she keeps quiet and she tries to sort it out and she tries to deal with it. I was talking about this earlier to someone today, a very high powered couple in politics. The husband has sort of constantly had many, many affairs, one after the other. The wife has been aware of all of these affairs, but she's just kept a very dignified silence through it all. And that's what makes her a dignified, good woman, that she's never actually confronted him. She's never done anything. She's never said to society, look, I really don't think this is a good thing. I wish that he didn't behave like this. So, this whole idea of a good woman, a dignified woman, an elegant woman, is the one who's good, the one who doesn't say anything about what is done to her, the silent one. At the moment you have a woman who'll say, how dare you to do this to me? Like, you raise your hand on me, I'm going to hit you right back. Suddenly she's the fishwife, she's the bad woman, she's the loud one. Everybody is like, oh yeah, well, you can understand why he cheated on her, because she's such a pain in the neck. I just think stories are so important because of the power that they carry.
Mm, mm. And with the Kama Sutra, is that a book, again, especially I'm thinking for people not familiar with it, is that a book that speaks about women's stories or
No,
stories from a
the
woman's
Kama
perspective?
Sutra. So the Kama Sutra is not a book about stories particularly. It's a treatise. It's supposed to be like a scientific treatise. So it's very supposedly very factual. And the Kama Sutra was written to teach men how to live their best life socially. So it was not written for women. Most people think that it was written to teach women how to pleasure a man. Actually, that is not the case. It was written to teach men how to live the perfect life. One section out of the 7 sections over there is about the arts of pleasure. And that definitely is about a woman's pleasure. So it teaches men all the things that a woman would find. Okay, it was supposed to teach men all the things that a woman would find pleasurable. But I don't want to say it as man and woman. I want to basically take away the binary from this and say that this was written 2000 years ago. It was written in a certain time, and therefore there are certain genders and pronouns that are used. Let's take that away. It actually talks about how a man feels pleasure and how a woman feels pleasure. And I personally think that it is an amazing text because it's the first book that I can come across that deals with the pleasure of a woman over and above everything else. In the introduction of the Kama Sutra, the original introduction, the author actually says, because clearly this is not a time when everything was wonderful for women, okay? There's a parallel society. There's an equal amount of misogyny. There's an equal amount of, the fact that pleasure has been the man's privilege forever. It is very much about getting the man to understand that the woman's pleasure is very important. So they make it aspirational because after all, why should a man suddenly give up the idea of his own pleasure and start thinking about somebody else's pleasure that's going to take like 20 times longer than his and actually working towards it? So it talks about how, if a man learns how to bring his woman fully to pleasure, then his business will do better. And if he learns how to bring her fully to pleasure, he'll become a better warrior because it's a skill that he can take to the battlefield. This whole idea, and okay, let me make that clear. It's not that you're going to go onto the battlefield and start having sex. That's not the point. The idea is that if you can go to the bed every day, the body has a very limited amount of movement, right? There's only so much you can do with the body. If you can go to your partner every day and still manage to approach the lovemaking in such a way that you can bring something new to it, bring an element of surprise to it, it means that you can take that skill to the battlefield because you're going over there either with your sword or with a bow and arrow. Your opponent expects that. So what can you do when you get to the battlefield? How can you bring that little element of surprise into it? So it basically says that all of these things equip you to be a more successful person in every other aspect of life.
So would you say that it was teaching men how to be more refined, sophisticated members of society rather than looking at
Yes,
sex?
so the idea of the Kama Sutra is, it says that, the evolutionary platform of a society, I mean, how evolved a society is, depends on how they treat their women. And the level of refinement of a society is measured by how they treat the lovemaking, whether they treat it as an art or whether it's treated as just a physical thing that you have to, be animalistic about. So the Kama Sutra is like a whole different stratosphere of treating lovemaking as an art form, the elegance, the beauty, the graciousness. It is unparalleled. Sometimes you look at it and you think, okay, this is like, a lot of people do tend to look at it and say, okay, maybe it sounds really wonderful to listen to, but really who would ever go that far as to spend that much time on it? But the idea was to gradually feed it into people's minds till it became part of the mindset, till that became the norm.
Wow. Well, very different to today's time. And just wondering, what about the language? What type of language did the Kama Sutra use for
So
people
again, it's all about beauty. So it's very much, if you think about it, the language that we use defines our behavior. And they literally talk about everything from a sort of standpoint of beauty. So if you're talking about, okay, so let's start with the most basic. It refers to, but I think that's also there in the ancient Chinese erotic literatures, where they refer to the sexual organs in the most beautiful terms. We talk about how the clitoris, the very first paper on the clitoris, as far as I can remember, was written in 1998, the very first paper describing the clitoris. The internet was discovered before the clitoris was discovered. But This is a society 2000 years ago that is talking about the clitoris, and it refers to it as the umbrella of the love god. So it's not just that, okay, this is one part of the body and okay, this is what you have to do to it. It actually refers to it, and it has certain lovemaking positions where it says that you only go as far as the clitoris and come out. It even has certain instructions for, the use of dildos and different sort of sexual aids, where it says you only penetrate as far as the clitoris, tap against it, come out. So the clitoris was obviously a very important part of lovemaking 2000 years ago, according to the Kama Sutra. It refers to the vagina as the swing of the love god, or the sandalwood palace, and I just think that those expressions of beauty are very, very intrinsic to the mindset that it's trying to create.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. And which of what was like your favorite part of the Kama Sutra, or chapter or section that you wouldn't mind sharing with
I
us?
think that my favorite section is to do with the jewelry. So the day I discovered that each piece of, so each position is described through a piece of jewelry. And it's not because, we're too prudish and we don't talk about positions by their names. It's the fact that in our literature, we only ever refer to it through the pieces of jewelry because women were taught how to execute these positions, perform these positions by how the jewelry moved on their body. And the first thing that I discovered on the jewelry side of things was, that if the woman was going to be on top, which, as you know, in ancient times, the woman was not permitted to be on top. It was absolutely a forbidden position for women. Being on top was about power. It was about control. In the Kama Sutra, you have several positions where you're on top. But for this, the women were taught to only move their hips. So the idea was that when you sat on top, you only move your hips to come to orgasm or bring your partner to orgasm. And to make sure that that's what you were doing, because it was all about the complete beauty of the picture. So it was about what part of your vagina, which G spot inside your vagina was being stimulated, how the rest of you looked. It was all about being an art form, right? And so women would wear like a jingling girdle on their waist, on their upper waist, with lots of little tiny bells on it. And they would make sure that the bells didn't make a sound because you only moved your hips. And each position had their own piece of jewelry. So in our literature, whenever we talk about in our stories about, how the woman climbed up on top, you never say things like, oh yeah, she climbed up on top and then she humped her way. You don't say any of that. You just say, she put on her jingling girdle. And that she's taken her position on top. Or if the man was to send her a jingling girdle earlier in the evening, she's coming to him later. It was like the ultimately romantic gesture, because that was supposed to be a memory of the lovemaking that they would have had before. How do you put your excitement, your thrill, your pleasure, just the sheer delight of being with your partner? How do you put that in words? You don't. And so this kind of triggered every one of those nerve endings, brought the pleasure.
Amazing, amazing. I never knew about that until I read your book and you mentioned that in one of the chapters. And yeah, it's amazing. And I think that especially for many of us in the Western world or English speaking countries, that's lost because that's not the impression that we hear from the translated Kama Sutra book.
Yeah,
So,
unfortunately, like I said, it's a treatise, and like all treaties, whether it's a European one or an Indian one, they're written in not easy everyday language. They're written in metaphorical language. And if you don't understand what a metaphor means, you're not going to translate it. And all of this knowledge was lost a long time ago.
but thankfully, you're bringing it back to life. I think that's, and like you mentioned about sex being about emotions, that's why when I was reflecting in terms of obviously the work that you're doing in storytelling, it's not just words on paper, but bringing it to life so people can embody it in their love lives, which I think again is great. And I think that was probably the essence of what the Kama Sutra was about, in terms of how to educate and teach people at the time, maybe meant to be more refined and sophisticated, whereas the work that you're doing is not only for men, but also for women as well. Now, with the work that you do with your storytelling, how what has been some of the challenges, shall I say, that you faced with the work that you do?
Well, it's the usual stuff, Habib. There's the usual trolls, there's the usual amount of disbelief. Actually, more than that, I find that sometimes when I talk about something which needs a change of mindset, it's so deeply ingrained. People don't actually want to change that because it's so much more work. Like I said in one of my videos that I'd done, and I was actually reacting in the longer video to a scene from one of the Bollywood films where the hero and the heroine are very, very drunk. I mean, they're absolutely legless. They're coming in, they can barely stand. And then suddenly they have this moment between them and they have sex. And suddenly, of course, when you have sex, it's all, oh, so beautiful and so coordinated, where they couldn't even stand earlier, but, suddenly everything was fine. And I was trying to make this point that, being drunk before you have sex is not a good idea. It's very good for bringing your inhibitions down. It'll take your inhibitions down. You suddenly won't feel shy. It's not good for performance because, as you know, for good sex, you need to have good arousal. For good arousal, you need to have a really good blood flow to the genitals. That's what makes for good arousal. And if you're drunk, that doesn't happen. The performance is never there. And I mentioned this. So the people who made the reel out of it, they kind of took it out of context and they were like, okay, and I'm talking about two people who are very, very drunk. And they took it out of context and they said, okay, drunk sex is really bad. I think it is. But, the number of people who came in, like 1,000 comments saying, I disagree. No, this is the best sex. It's the best sex I've ever had is drunk sex. Do you know what? No, it isn't. If you're ever going to truly understand the pleasure, the importance, the delight of it, you have to be a little bit more aware. So I can understand if you have one drink or two at the most, according to the Kama Sutra, no more than two. But if you have that, fine. But if you get drunk or you've smoked weed or whatever, really, it doesn't lead to good sex. And I'll tell you what, if you're too drunk, you will end up either throwing up on your partner or something equally disgusting. I'm sorry, that is that's fact.
Just for the benefit of people joining, I'm speaking to Seema Anand, who is a phenomenal storyteller, mythologist, and author of this wonderful book, The Arts of Seduction. Speaking a little bit, which is I would say it's a modern rendition or it's a modern day guide to help couples have pleasurable sex. And she's also a Kama Sutra expert. I'm going to actually now start with some of the questions because I've got a ton, like I mentioned in the beginning. I think some of are actually about, is there a difference between male and female desire in the
There's a
Kama Sutra?
huge amount of difference between male and female desire. It actually says in the introduction again, it says that men and women are so different in their desire. As we know, we've talked about how men actually, their desire is like fire. It's very easy to ignite. It's very easy to put out. And it begins down there and it goes upwards. Women, their desire is like water. Oh my goodness. Hello.
Sorry, that was me.
Women's desire is like water. It starts over here and it flows downwards. And like water, it's very difficult to bring it to the boil. It takes a long time and takes a long time for it to cool down again. So the desire is so different in men and women that it actually says in the introduction that it's amazing to think that two sets of people with such different levels of desire and arousal should be expected to come together and enjoy the same thing at the same time. And because we are so different, that's why it recommends all of these different things for foreplay, for arousal, for bringing each other to the right level. So yes, desire in men and women is extremely different. And it doesn't automatically synchronize. You have to work at making it happen.
Someone's asked, do you have any words of advice or tips on how I can build a confidence to speak to my hubby? I'm assuming it's a woman, to speak to my hubby about my needs in the bedroom.
Okay, so I think that the first thing to do is to understand your own needs. I find that a lot of people um, are not, men and women both, and they're not used to understanding their own pleasure. They've never actually pleasured themselves. They don't really know what they need themselves. So it's more difficult then to speak to the partner and tell them what they want till you don't know what you want yourself. Now, there is also a lot of times when men take this as a real insult to their manhood. If the woman comes along and says, well, actually, this is what I would like, and this is what. So I think the best way to do that, and I know it's awkward because a lot of times they don't mean to not make you, not pleasure you, but a lot of people have this idea in their head what they think, especially from watching porn, what they think the other person will like. And I think it's about being really brave and actually sort of saying, could we try this too? I think this might be something that I'd like to try. And maybe saying that a few times. I do also understand. I had a question recently from a man actually who said that my girlfriend says that she wants a facial finish where, you know, she wants him to come on her face. And he was like, I think that this is a disgusting idea. I won't do it to her because I think that this is demeaning a woman and I refuse to do it. And I think that she's got this idea from watching porn. And how do I convince her that this is not a good thing? And I was thinking to myself, you know, she's probably just about picked up the courage to ask you what she wants you to do, just to try it. So don't judge her for what she's asking you to do. How about you actually try it? Just because she is your girlfriend, you are together, it's okay. You know, if this is what she wants, try it the one time. Tell her later that it makes you uncomfortable if necessary, but don't tell her, oh, you're watching porn and getting these ideas and it's wrong. You know, there's a difference. So yeah, in terms of asking hubby, if he's not really open to it, maybe just sort of try and go around it a little bit. Say, okay, you know, you're trying this, but how about we try it this way as well? Just maybe try and make it gentler, the suggestion.
Okay. Um, this was actually kind of a question that I kind of also wanted to ask as well, was about the perfume. If you can touch on, I know you've got a chapter in your book about the art of pure perfuming. What is the relationship between perfuming and intimacy and lovemaking in the Kama Sutra and your book?
Okay, so the idea, of course, in the Kama Sutra, it's a very basic idea that you have different perfumes over different parts of your body, and that is supposed to excite the senses. Now, the way it works, the way that I figure that it works, because of course, you know, especially if you've been with your partner for a while, or even if you haven't, even if it's the first couple of times, most of us tend to make love in the same way. Even if you have this thing of kissing your partner, you know, you go down their body, you go down each other's bodies. Most of us do things in exactly the same way. It's kind of like a routine, you know. You start with kissing on the mouth, then you might kind of go into the ear, then you go down the neck, then you go down a little bit further. And after a little while, that becomes a routine. And it starts to fall into monotony. Because if you do the same thing every day or even slightly different, you've been down the same waistline, you've been down the same arm, you've been down the same leg. After a little while, monotony will set in. And the idea of changing your fragrance is it wakes the brain up suddenly. So you go from the waist, which is perfumed with a very light scent of roses, and you're sort of enjoying that bit, you move down to the hip a little bit, and suddenly it's musk, or the belly button has got musk, and it changes the perfume, it wakes you up. And I think that it just adds variety and excitement to your lovemaking, which otherwise wouldn't be there.
Another quick question, well, hopefully that's a quick question. Is the Kama Sutra the only book on sex from ancient India? If not, are there what if there are others, what made the Kama Sutra so successful or special?
So there are thousands. The Kama Sutra itself, the author says that he didn't write anything new. He's copied and pasted stuff from books written 1,000 years before, and he's just taken the bits that he likes. So there are a lot of them. The Kama Sutra is the oldest extant text. So it's the oldest existing text because ancient India wrote their texts on palm leaf, and a lot of those got destroyed over time. Our weather is such, our climates is such that palm leaf got destroyed. The only reason we know about it is because you kind of go backwards, you quote some of them, etc. So this is the oldest existing text. And even the later texts that have come, they tend to quote them. So we tend to talk about the later texts as being commentaries on the Kama Sutra, but it could well have been commentaries on even earlier texts for all we know.
Right. Lovely. And you said that the text is not an original text, so was the author citing previous texts?
He's citing previous texts that are written from about 1,000 years before. It's original in itself, in what it says. The introduction to it is totally original. It's what he writes, or whoever the author of the Kama Sutra is, they write it. The Kama Sutra itself, like I said, the rest of it is a book about how to live your best life, how to build your house, how to decorate your house, how to find a wife, how to marry the right woman. So all of that would have been the original Kama Sutra. I'm talking about the section 2, which is the section on lovemaking. That bit he's taken from different places and put it down. We have a lot of texts talking about pleasure because pleasure was supposed to be a really good thing. It was supposed to be an energy. It was supposed to, I'll tell you something which is really unusual, and it's my new book, my new research is based on this. We have a lot of love festivals that were celebrated that the Kama Sutra mentions, which we've lost now. So we don't have these love festivals anymore. And they're mentioned in the Kama Sutra, but there's no description, so you don't know what they are. And it's only in all the old fiction, all the epic romances that were written, that you get an idea of what these, because they're described, these festivals are described in these books. There are about 30 of them, and they happen at different times of the year. So when I first started researching them, I thought they were all in springtime, but they're not. They're different times of the year. And the idea is that you have to bring Mother Earth to her arousal. So it's all about Mother Earth. You make Mother Earth blossom, and that then filters down to human beings automatically. So it is very much about being in sync with the earth. Then I discovered something really interesting, and that's my aha moment. So, in the 5th century AD, in the 15th century AD, we have the entire earth experiences a lot of natural calamities, floods, famines, earthquakes, blah, blah, blah. Everywhere else, in the 5th century, the Catholic Church is saying that it's a punishment from God because the Roman emperors have been so lustful, they haven't been able to control their desires, and hence the gods are punishing them. And so the punishments begin and the sacrifices begin and so on. In ancient India, they said that when the earth gets angry, it's because she's lost sight, she's forgotten about her pleasure. And so they had the love festivals to bring her back to her pleasure, to remind her how good it felt when she experienced pleasure. And that, I think, it sort of says it all. That's amazing.
Oh. And in the modern day South Asian cultures and in India today, is the Kama Sutra and such texts widely spoken about?
No, by and large, as you can also see from some of the very stupid comments, some of them are Hindi, so you can't tell what they say. No, they're not widely spoken about. They're still treated as something bad. You mentioned the word Kama Sutra, and everybody kind of goes, because they believe it's a book about lovemaking. It's a bad thing. I don't think that's going to change in a hurry, unfortunately. And then, of course, there's a lot of people out there, particularly from, like I said, some of the comments that I've been reading in Hindi. There are some very abusive people out there who think that it's okay to come on and say, shit stuff about sex or about women or about somebody of my age talking about sex. So I get it everywhere. Unfortunately, we're even getting some of these idiots over here. And I really would like to say that, if that's what you want to say, please actually go home, because there are a lot of people there who are enjoying it, and I can see some of the,
Yeah,
some of the
I've
really
seen.
nice comments.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I've seen some of the comments. I generally try to ignore it. I was going to switch off the comments, but then I see a lot of positive as well. So I try and focus on the positive, and there's so many love
Absolutely.
hearts going up, and
There's
a
a
lot of fans
lot
that
of
you've got.
Yeah, there's a lot of wonderful comments, and that's what it's all about. The others, I have realized, I'm sorry, but the guys who, there are people who can disagree with you. I have no problem with that. It's the idiots who come in with remarks like this, and I'm going to be politically incorrect and call them idiots right here on social media and in public, because it's so pointless. Those remarks are so indecent and they're so inappropriate and they're so unnecessary, and it just goes to show how the mindset is. How are we going to change it? The kind of aggression there is that women face, and men, not just women, men face, women face around sexuality, and it comes from mindsets like this. People who think that it's okay to be aggressive and abusive about a subject like sexuality, which we're talking about as something beautiful and pleasurable. It's like, here are morons who are kind of talking like this. And I really wish they would go and find themselves another platform which resonates with them, where they can say, yeah, I totally agree with you. Wouldn't it be so much nicer for them as well?
It would,
But
but like you said, and I could agree, idiots, morons. There's a lot of and cowards as well, because most of those people, if not 99% of them, um, or not
have
100% of
hidden
them, would never
identities.
say it into your face. It's just
Absolutely
again
not.
when they're behind a keyboard, whether it's their laptop or their phone, it's very easy to say such things. And I think it's important, especially obviously like with the work that you're doing, that and that's why I obviously wanted to speak to you, because there are a number of women who can be empowered and inspired by the work that you're doing. Unfortunately, there are going to be some detractors and some idiots and morons who are going to say ridiculous things. But I think it's important that space is created so there's not only for the great work that you're doing, but other women can be not only learn from, but be empowered and inspired by. And
And I
that leads
actually
me.
want to, at this
Yeah.
point, say to the people who are sending in all the love that, trust me, you guys are the ones who keep me going, because when those other moronic comments come, because whenever I get interviewed, people always want to talk about the trolling. I don't want to talk about the trolling. I'm tired. I'm bored of the trolls. I really want to talk about the people who send in the love, because I think that they are fabulous, and I get my energy and my strength and my motivation from you guys. So please do continue sending the love. You'd have no idea how much it means to me.
I personally I agree. I don't like to concentrate on morons or idiots. I prefer to concentrate on the positive, and like I said, even when speaking about the challenges, I like to use like challenges in a way that okay, this is a challenge, and how do you overcome them? And then this was going to lead me to my next question, that someone is thinking of getting someone who's interested in becoming a storyteller. She was asking, is there any advice that you can give to become like the storyteller that you are?
Okay, so there are different types of storytelling and there are different ways of storytelling. I think that the best thing to do when you begin to tell stories, first of all, is understand what kind of stories you want to tell. So my advice is always start with a story that's personal to you, because it's easier to tell it. When you're not having to learn up something, it's much easier to tell it when it's playing through your head, because then you tend to use more normal words as well. That's the second thing. Don't go into fabulous fancy words. Great fancy words are brilliant to read on a paper. They're terrible when you're listening to a storyteller, because you lose track of what you're listening to. So if you want your audience to be totally hooked onto what you're saying, they have to be able to follow what you're saying. The next thing, which is really important, is learn your story. Even if you're telling a personal story, write it down so you have an idea of what the script will be like, and then learn it up. Because if you stop to go, you actually don't do yourself any favors either. And I think the next thing that I want to say, which is really important, it may not sound important, but it truly is, plant your feet very firmly on the ground. Actually connect. Okay, if you're sitting cross-legged on the floor or something, then you can't plant your feet, but make sure that whatever your base is, it should be really, feel the connection between you and the ground. It's incredibly relaxing, and it gives you the chance to focus better. And finally, these are my top 5 tips to get started with storytelling. And finally, the 5th one, you know, we tend to do this when you go up onto stage or in front of people and you know you're going to tell a story, you're going to perform it, so to speak. Somehow our voices kind of go into higher pitch. You know, you start talking like this because you're trying to understand it consciously, take a deep breath, and then actually go down a couple of octaves. So go back so that, you know, where your shoulders go downwards, physically push your shoulders down and bring your voice up from your belly so that it's a deeper voice. The moment you speak with a deeper voice, somehow you do tend to get more relaxed. Your story will come out more easily. Start with that. So yeah, somebody just said, summarize it very quickly. Take a personal story, much easier. Just because you can play it in your head, so you know what happened. Don't use complicated words. Don't use exciting sentences. I was listening to somebody who was very sweet, telling a story about how she gets a realization. She has this epiphany one day. And she says, you know, this sort of feeling, this realization came to her, and then it crawled down her body and it got into all the nooks and crannies of her joints and kind of tingled over there. You know, no, don't. It's unnecessary. Learn to first get the story out and then go back to things like that. Learn it up, because if you know what you're saying, you're able to focus better. Number 4, plant yourself, whichever part, whether you're sitting cross-legged, plant your bottom firmly on the floor. If you're standing, plant your feet firmly on the floor. Feel the earth. And finally, speak with a deeper voice. Relax your shoulders, bring your voice out from the base of your tummy.
Amazing, amazing. Great advice, great advice. I should have actually asked this in the beginning. Can you define what is a mythologist?
So, you know, most people think when we talk about mythologies that we're talking about something that's not true. Mythologies are stories that civilizations and societies create to explain certain things. So to explain life to themselves and to their children, or the principles of something. So there's stories created to explain the philosophies and teachings of their culture to themselves and to their children. Okay, so as a mythologist, my work is to look at stories, because eventually it's about going backwards to understand what is the philosophy that they were trying to explain. Because when the philosophies were written, particularly in ancient India, there is a philosophy for everything. We have an incredible amount of text. We have an incredible amount of knowledge. It's very difficult to understand. And again, it comes from the, so there's the author of the Mahabharata, Vedyas. He has this conversation at one point with Narad Muni. Narad is the wandering sage. And there's this wonderful conversation where Vedyas is sitting looking very depressed, and Narad comes to him and he says, "Why are you so depressed?" And he says, "You know, I've been trying to explain to people how to live their best life. I've been trying to tell them that if this is the situation, this is how they should behave. This is the philosophy they should follow. If this is happening, this is what they should do." But nobody's following that, and society's falling into disrepair, and people are falling into depression, and I don't know what to do. And Narad says to him, he says, "You've just made it too complicated. I mean, if somebody has this issue going on, where are they going to know which book to go and look into, what philosophy to find, how to interpret that philosophy, how to make it resonate with what you're feeling? How the hell do you do all that? Make it into stories and tell the people, and it'll be so much easier for them to learn." And so mythologies are very, very important. And to me, it's all about understanding. So it's about understanding the story, understanding how we relate to certain things, and then going backwards to understand the philosophies from that. For me, also, the other thing is that these stories become so important because these stories are like role models for me. You know, when we talk about the fact that, okay, let's take in our field about sexuality, you know, there are people who write in and say, I have such and such a fetish. Is that okay? I feel desire for so and so. Is that a sin? Now, if we had stories where this sort of thing happens, people automatically know, no, it's okay. You know, it's happened before. This is normal. So these are our role models. So we need them. We need our mythologist. So that's what a mythologist does.
Wow. And especially in relation to stories pertaining to women, because you specialize in women's narratives in erotic Indian literature. Uh, would you say that there's not enough stories that's been told about women's narratives?
Definitely. Well, there's a lot of stories told about women, but all from one particular narrative about how they should be very, you know, the best women are the ones who are very silent. The best women are who only do what their husbands say. The best women are who are totally pure. I mean, we have a story from our cultural background which talks about this woman who goes to the riverside to get water. So she goes every day. And one day, as she's getting water, there is this man, this young man, filling up water in a pot. And she looks at him. And she looks at him and she clearly thinks, oh, he's very attractive. That's all she does. She looks at him, she comes away. She doesn't speak to him. She doesn't wait over there. She doesn't flirt with him. She doesn't think of him afterwards. She looks at him and thinks he's attractive. And they say that she immediately loses her purity. She has become impure. So her power, she was so pure. Her power was that she could carry water in an unbaked pot. And as she comes away, the pot breaks. She no longer has that power because she's no longer that pure because she looked at another man. And her husband then, hence her husband knows that she's no longer pure. And he actually decides, he actually tells his sons that she has been unfaithful, she's become impure and she needs to be killed. I mean, the story then goes on and does other things, but you know, it is literally, those are the stories that we're telling. We're divorcing women from the right to pleasure through controlling them, through saying the best woman is the one who does this, the best woman who is so pure that it was about even controlling your mind. You know, it was, yeah. So there's lots of women's stories, but they're just all told from a different perspective.
Right. No, that makes sense. So it's about having more women or female-centered or pleasure-positive stories where it's because that story sounds wild, what you just narrated, but then I can imagine that's probably
It's,
coming from
yeah.
a very insecure man, or I don't know how to describe it. To say that because a woman looked at or found another
Well,
man
there's a
attractive
lot.
to
The
become
thing is that those stories are by their millions. I mean, it's not just the one-off. You know, it's. I just think it's really. I just think it's really awful that we somewhere along the way we've managed to do that. And you know, stories change automatically. So as the world evolves, as society evolves, as women get more independence, the story will change. There is a huge machinery going into, because if a woman becomes independent, she's no longer dependent on the man. She doesn't any longer have to put up with the kind of nonsense that was being meted out to her. It upsets the balance of power. So there's a huge machinery in place to keep the stories exactly the same. And one of those, of course, is the trolling idiots who come on and basically, because you know, for a lot of girls, especially when they first get the abuse, it really does shut them up. It's very distressing. I know what it was like for me when I first started getting the abuse. It's very intimidating. It's very distressing. And you know, we realized that the internet has become a place, it's so frightening. You cannot walk alone even on the internet. You need a group of people around you. You need somebody else standing up for you.
yeah. And what could men do to help?
I think the wonderful thing that men could do is to just start being supportive. I find that a lot of men want to help, and a lot of men want to be on the side of the woman that they're with. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pre-fed narrative. So my advice is that listen, rather than saying, okay, I know about this, listen each time. Okay, how do I put it? Let's say that a woman, every woman at some stage, almost every woman at some stage will have her periods. Every woman reacts differently to her period. So instead of saying, I'm going to support you by reading up about periods and understanding it totally, and now look, I've read it, so I know exactly what you're going to be feeling, just listen to her instead. Let her tell you how she's feeling. One month I might be absolutely fine. The other month I might have cramps. Everything is normal. Don't have preconceived ideas. It's okay to listen to each other, to communicate with each other.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. And just before we end, I'm just wondering, is there any upcoming projects or events you've got upcoming, or maybe another book, or anything you want to talk about or plug? And people
Well,
buy this
no,
book, by the way,
actually.
before this is buy this book. I'm gonna put a link on there when I save it, but definitely buy this book. It's very easy to read. It's not even that long. Was it less than 200 pages? But yeah, definitely buy this book. Sorry.
Thank you. No, I can't actually. Like I said, the book is coming. I have to work a little bit harder on getting getting the material out there. Getting pen to paper. I haven't done that, but yes, I am looking forward to creating it because again, to me, it's just about bringing out the stories and changing the mindsets. I don't really mind about the people who don't want to change their mind. They're very welcome to not. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to swim upstream. What I'm trying to do is literally give a voice to the people who think the same way that I do, because a lot of us don't have a voice. And it's very hard. That's the hard bit, when you start verbalizing it, when you give yourself a voice, when you start speaking about it, that's when people come after you and you get abused. And so I think what I'd like to do is create a tribe, give a voice, and, just carry on so that as more and more people join that tribe, as we march together, we at least we have somewhere to fall back on, like we have recourse.
I definitely think you have created a tribe. You've got hundreds of thousands of followers. You've got, like, in your TED Talks, over 12 million viewers. So you've definitely created a tribe. And again, like I said, you're definitely inspiring a lot of women and men alike. But I think a lot of men were hiding in the shadows. So you definitely have more supporters than idiot trolls and
Oh
detractors
yeah,
and things like
definitely. Touch wood, definitely. But yeah, there's a lot of men, and you know what? It delights me when the guys write in and talk. And every now and then somebody will say something inappropriate, and I find that there are a lot of them that I can actually write back to and say, look, I'm sorry, but that isn't acceptable. And we can have a normal conversation where some of the guys on a recent post wrote back saying, oh, sorry, I won't do that again, or I didn't realize that was inappropriate. And I think that's fantastic. It's so nice to be able to have a conversation. But yeah, all power to all of us. Habib, you as well, because you're the one who taught me about the traditions of Kunyaza. So everybody out there who's listening to this, go and check out Habib's book on Kunyaza. And Kunyaza is about the idea of squirting, what everybody today knows as squirting, everything. It's all on porn these days. So, everybody is very excited about squirting. But this is a very ancient African tradition, which I only learned about from Habib. And, I just think it is fantastic. I've actually been talking about it to people. I even wrote an article recently where I said that, when you're talking about helping a woman loosen up just before sex, you don't just pleasure her with your fingers. One of the great things is to be able to tap her on the outside of the vulva, like you do in Kunyaza, right? with your palm. If you actually tap that part and rub that part, that is so exciting as well for ladies. So everybody out there, please take note.
Lovely. It's been an absolute pleasure. Before we go, is there a favorite story you have about women's pleasure that you don't mind sharing?
So this, I think my favorite story, and it will continue to be my favorite story, is about the woman who has this guy who regularly visits her. And one day when he comes to her, she smells the perfume of another woman on him, and she starts to get really fascinated by this other woman. And so she starts to leave messages on this man's body in the way of love bites and love scratches, because of course the Kama Sutra has a whole vocabulary around love bites and love scratches. So she starts to leave messages on this man's body for the other woman, and eventually the other woman picks it up, and they start to communicate with each other through his body. So they never meet, but they actually literally explore each other's bodies through his body. And I just think that that story is so amazing because it is so unashamedly about purely the pleasure that a woman would feel, and I just think that it's wonderful. It's still the man who has the two women. Nobody's putting the man down. There he is visiting both women. He's still the main person in their lives, but we're talking about the women's pleasure over here, and I love that story.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you very much, Seema. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to save this because, again, I'm sure the amount of people that are sending me message, I won't be able to read all of them. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for your time. Please keep up the good work, the great work that you're doing. You've got many people that are supporting you. Like I said, please ignore the trolls, the detractors, the idiots, the morons. Because they don't deserve any of your time. But again, like I said, please continue doing what you're doing. You've got many people that are supporting you in many parts of the world. So yeah, just wanted to say, just to give kudos to you, and please keep up the good work.
Thank you, Habib. Thank you so much, and you too.
Lovely. We'll speak soon. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a good evening or good morning wherever you are. I'm going to try and save this now.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye.
Bye bye.